All right, Berto, we're back with part 2 of the psychology of Casey Anthony. I don't know if that's what I'm going to call it, but it's a Casey Anthony story.
Yeah.
And we're getting into it, a lot of details. What do you say? Let's continue talking about it.
Let's do it.
This is the Psychology in Seattle podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor.
My name is Humberto Castañeda, and I make knobs that are really hard to turn.
So let's just take Casey's story as an example of how pathological lying can emerge. And this is why I'm like, either she's a really good liar and she knows a lot about psychology, which we have reasons to believe that she would, or there's some truth to what she's saying here, which is that the breeding ground for lying, pathological lying, is when there's a number of factors. One is modeling. So if you have parents who model deception and lying to you, or you believe that the parents are lying, then that tells you, children do what they see. The fact that you and I speak you speak 2 languages, I speak 1. The reason why we speak these languages is because when we were 0 to 5, we mimicked how other people talk. Our syntax and vocabulary and accent are not natural. These are manufactured, constructed, very specific things that are solely from mimicry. And by the time kids enter school, they've already acquired a lot of their language quality, So that's all from mimicry. It's just watching and mimicking and learning and watching and mimicking and learning and copying and playing with and copying. And that's just language, but we do it with everything. We do it with the notion of violence. When you see violence, when you see parents hitting each other or one parent hitting the other, then you will hit. And we will see this. If you see sexual abuse happening when you're young, then you will sexually abuse other kids, or you will be sexually inappropriate with other kids. We just do everything that other people do. We walk like our parents do. We talk like them. Our morals are like them. We think like them. If they go to church and believe in God, we also do. If they don't, then we don't. Everything, we watch the same TV shows, everything, we just do what they do. There are anomalies to that, but that's the general thing. And so if we have lying modeled to us, then we just get that encoded as what we're supposed to do, just without question. In the same way that I don't question my language, and I also don't question my morality is another thing.
Right.
The reason why I don't lie is because my parents did not lie when I was young. I wasn't born with this natural propensity not to lie. I mean, you could argue maybe there's a little bit in that direction of altruism and whatnot, but a lot of my behavior is because my parents modeled this to me. Okay, so then the second risk factor, the second experience, is that if you're forced into a situation where often it's better to lie than not to lie, then it'll create the incentive to lie. And one of the situations that will have that happen is if you're being abused. If your parents are prone to lose their temper and smack you around when they get angry, and you know that, and you go through that experience, then as a strategy, you just learn how to lie better, and so you start experimenting with that. So the first time you break something, you break a plate, and your parents come around the corner and they're like, "Did you break it?" And as a kid, you're like, "Yeah, I'm sorry. I just, I bumped it and it slipped off the table." And then you proceed to get beaten for 3 days or something. And the next time this happens,
that's a no.
Yeah. So the next time this happens is you do something similar to this, and you very quickly will lie about it.
Yeah.
And say 50% of the time, you're believed, or it throws the parents off the scent or something like that. And so that locks in. You're conditioning a child to do that behavior for survival, right? Yeah. What ends up happening is neurologically, the brain actually changes to, and we don't have strong evidence of this, but there's a lot of behavioral evidence of this, is that you lock in, what wires together, fires together. And so what happens is over time, the child, when they have even a little bit of anxiety, and it's triggered by anxiety, their brain operates in this different mode of never tell the truth and lie easily and quick, because the faster you lie, the more convincing it is. And the more further it is from the truth, the better it is for you. And so what you'll hear from adults that are trying to recover from this. They're not psychopaths. They have pathological lying, and they don't like that about themselves. And there are many people like this. They will find that it's actually really hard for them not to lie, that they have anxiety. Their boss comes around the corner and says, like, did you turn in that TPS report? And, it's normal to have like a little tiny bit of anxiety of like, oh shit, no, I didn't turn it in. And you intellectually know as a worker that your boss isn't going to hate you. They're just going to be like, oh, well, can you get it to me by later today? Intellectually, you know that, but your limbic system doesn't know that. Your trauma reactivity doesn't know that. And you instantly lie. Yep, I turned it in, I put it on your table. It's not there. Someone must have stole it. And then this is flying out of your face. And then a half hour later, you're like, why did I lie? Why did I do that? And now I have to lie about my lies. Now I've got to follow, really screws people up. And again, these are not psychopaths. These are not people that are like trying to lie in the overall picture. It's a knee-jerk reaction. It's a trauma response because it is emulative, but not actually of when they were a child and the abuse, the fist of their parent was about to come down on their head,
Yeah. Totally. And in this case, again, if we were believing everything, which is, of course, hard because the whole thing's predicated on everything's lying. But there were two angles, which was that there is that fear of like the abuse and also literally the modeling that we just lie for a living, period. So, because in the example you gave where the child lies or the child tells the truth, gets beat up, so then they start, that's horrible and traumatic, of course. And then there's the other angle. Like, for example, like I grew up in a household where there were lies, a lot of lies. And I feel like I could have easily developed into a person that just felt like I just need to always lie, And I think certain things worked just enough against that because I got in such bad trouble when I lied when I was young, when I was lying for no good reason, that I think it's sort of like counterbalanced it. But
I would call you an honest person, particularly today. But in the past, there were some moments of, not overall, but some critical moments where you were lying or lying by omission to me. Right.
But I feel like I could have actually been potentially way worse in maybe even pathological, given that I was growing up in an environment where the truth was not welcome.
Yeah. You grew up in a situation not that dissimilar to what Casey was describing anyway, of shame from the outside world. And
where we
lies.
Have to pretend things are normal when they're not. And so I feel like I can relate to that. And in fact, I've told these stories before. I had these formative moments where I actually saw that lying was way worse in its outcome than just having come clean.
Yeah.
And I feel like that helped push against it.
Absolutely. And your dad was instrumental in that. He very carefully and skillfully walked you through that process.
Which is ironic because he was also instrumental in the example of living in a fake reality.
Right.
So it's like he was doing both simultaneously.
Yeah.
But anyways, I'm bringing that up to say that I can relate and believe that. Like that's not something where I go, oh, how could that happen? I basically experienced a small version of that. And I feel like I was sort of saved by the bell from not being a really egregious liar in my life. But I could have easily not gone that way.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I would call you a very honest person, particularly these days. And the other factor, the other experience that can cause this pathological lying is similar to the other two, but it's worth delineating, which is basically what you're talking about. And what Casey claims is that when you have tremendous shame, for her, she claims she was being sexually abused by her dad. And it's a terrifying experience to have that happen to you, obviously. You understand, even if it's not told to you as a threat by your parent, that if you tell anyone, there will be unknown dire consequences. When you're 13 years old and you're being raped by your dad, that's one of the things that victimizers, perpetrators will either benefit from without them knowing, or they'll utilize to their advantage, which is that they understand, as the perpetrators, that if the child says anything, it'll open up such a can of worms, and so many bad things could happen. Right? The even if it's for the best, right?
Yeah.
Kaylee or Casey might have been taken out of the home and put into the foster care system. That's a extremely unknown scenario. And or the dad could flip out. He was a former police officer. Maybe he has a gun and he kills Casey or the mom or himself, or he beats her, or no one believes Casey, or he no one believes her, and then he ramps up his raping of her or something. Like there's just so many unknowns, and when you don't have a support system and you don't have education around this, and you don't have a safety net, a public safety net that's at least available in a way that is helpful to kids like this, then often the logical answer is to say nothing, and so you're stuck, right? Yeah. Now, if there is anyone in a situation like that, obviously there are people you go to. If you went to a therapist, they would actually be able to help you navigate the system so that it would be what's best for you. And it's not without its bumps in the road, of course. But anyway.
But if the thing's happening between 8 and 12, like, who do you go to? Especially when she claims, which isn't unbelievable if it was happening, that he told her literally that if she told her mom would be very, very upset at her. Right.
Which could actually be true, right?
Yeah.
A lot of the other parents will, because of their own denial, will just say, "No, you're wrong. You're a liar," that kind of stuff. Yeah. Plus, Casey had already been lying up and down until that point, so Casey might think, "Well, who's going to believe me anyway? Because I'm a pathological liar anyway." So what this does is it puts a person in a situation where they are being forced to lie by omission to everyone about something that is extremely significant to them. They feel it's very shameful. They feel that they are participating in it somehow, or that it's something about them that's making this happen, something about their family. And they just learn this lesson that when you have something that's shameful, you stuff it down deep. And not only does that save you from whatever shame you think is going to happen, but it also saves you from having to think about it. Right. It's so much. We have a well-known defense of denial and other defenses that I won't go into that are related to this, which is you just stuff it down deep. You don't think about it. You just move on with your day. We all have this ability.
Yep.
For example, for me, there are things about the world, about the political landscape, about the environmental landscape, about the state of affairs in my community or the country or the world, that when I think about it, I can't do anything other than just crawl into a fetal position and cry. Yeah. I have to stuff it down deep. I have to go into denial. I can't focus on that. I have to go on. I have to continue to live my life. Otherwise, none of us, the fact that we're all going to die one day, if I really just think about that long and hard enough, I'm just like, what is happening?
So, but this is why the Egyptian society thrived for so long, back in the glory days of the pyramids. Because whenever things got rough, they could always go into the Nile.
I mean, every time you say denial, you have to say that pun.
Every single time.
Because it's just, there's got to be another angle, because you're just talking about Egypt and there's got to be some other thing, right? Aren't the Shriners, don't they have something about the Nile or something? Or?
Maybe, but listen, if I didn't live up to it, I'd be denialing my own nature,
Golly. I mean, that's why people love you, Berto.
In quotes.
Well, no, in reality. It's a love-hate relationship.
It's a love.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you are forced into this protracted space of the biggest thing in your life, you can't tell anyone. You can't even tell your mom. You can't talk about, in the middle of being raped, your dad walks out of your room, you walk out of your room, and there's your mom, and you just have to not only just by omission, just not mention it, but you also have to put on a happy face.
Yep.
To your brother, to your mom, to your friends, to school, to the people who have been through this will attest this. It's like living in a dream. You're walking through the day, and everyone, you go to the lunchroom, and you're a kid, and then there's recess, and people are playing on the monkey bars. And meanwhile, this monkey on your back is, your dad raped you this morning. Your dad raped you this morning. And you're just like, well, I
can't, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da.
Yeah, never mind denial, and let's play. But you're not really happy, and you're not really enjoying yourself. You're not really spontaneous. Your life becomes one extreme lie.
Eeks.
So we could imagine that if Casey either murdered or accidentally Kaylee died, we could imagine a very self-destructive but well-ingrained neurological pathway in her, a well-ingrained neurological mode of hers, which is to go into denial and stuff it down deep and put on a happy face, do nothing different, do everything the same, act normal. You could imagine that being true, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And the documentary, the Peacock documentary, makes a very good case for this happening.
And by the way, this is always a tough thing with, we had these conversations before. Not all, but many people that have done horrible things had horrible childhoods. And so if you draw a continuum of their experience, you're like, wow, that's just a tragedy from the start. You know, that person didn't really have a chance, and then also did some horrific things. They passed it down. And it is tragic. So what's hard is that you never know. In this case, you never know where the truth starts and ends, and therefore, even if all the abuse was real, they might still have been directly responsible for the death of their child, and it's just like, it's heart-wrenching.
Yeah. So, by the way, just to close the loop on the story I was saying earlier, the detectives took Casey to Universal Studios knowing that she didn't work there, and Casey's like, oh, let me show you where I work. And Casey led detectives around the building for 25 minutes.
She was waving at people.
Before, and people are looking at her like, huh? And then she just stopped and she started smiling and jokingly admitted that she had no office there and that she was fired years before that.
Yeah, the officer says she put her hands in her back pockets, turned around and smiled and said, I don't really work here.
Yeah. So again, that's not normal lying. Something's going on there, okay? You know, if she was just some crazed murderer, then it would fit a different profile. She could still be a crazed murderer with this profile, but at least this amount of shooting herself in the foot lends itself not only to a lot of mistreatment growing up, but also could explain why she didn't do anything, even after her claim is the Kaylee had died accidentally somehow.
You know, like the only way I can relate to that in this small way is with video games. I don't do this much anymore, but I used to try to be competitive, but I was never actually that good at a lot of video games. I just wanted to be good. And I had a couple friends who were better than me, but I would brag really, braggadociously. I'd be like, oh, I'm gonna wipe the floor with you this time, and like make a big case. And I'd go in, and then at the last second, I'd realize I'm in over my head, and I'd be like, oh yeah, no, okay, I knew I was gonna. But I remember that feeling of like putting on that face and pretending till it's impossible to keep pretending. And it must be that simple, obviously multiplied times a million, but it's like you're sitting there in what should be the fight for your life or your daughter's life or both, and you're going like, how long do I keep this up? I guess I'll just keep going. But isn't it fascinating that you would think you would short circuit early on, like, oh my gosh, we're here. Okay, I can't go in the building. I gotta come clean. No,
but that's why it's neurological, right? There's a section of her mind that is offline. Yeah. Because it's easier. It's easier to lie when you believe it than when you don't believe it. And if lies are that important to uphold throughout your childhood, then neurologically you rewire your brain knows how to like adapt, and it figures out the best case scenarios, not only lying, but you actually believe it. Yeah. And you'll pull it off more easily that way. You know what I mean? Yeah. Every day she has to lie by omission to her friends and to her teacher and to her mom and to her brother. No, that isn't happening. My family life is fine. My dad is the pillar of society. It's easier if you believe it than if you don't.
And normally her experience had been that normally actually that does work out, because like in the examples where her family just supports the lie, her life keeps going. She doesn't pay any big consequence. So that reinforces like, yeah, I guess I just keep lying. That's what we do.
Right, exactly. Let's take another break, Berto. When we get back, let's continue with my notes. What do you say?
Let's do it.
Okay, so just kind of racing through the rest of my notes here. So she is charged because they, at the very least, are like, well, you've lied to us, so we're going to charge you with at least that. And now you're a major suspect in the murder of this child or the disappearance of this child. So they detain her and they start investigating her heavily at this point. The dad is really nice to Casey's face, according to Casey. And behind the scenes, and they do have footage of the dad during this time and beyond, and during the trial, the dad is clearly on the side of the prosecution, right?
Right.
So that lends itself maybe to a different narrative than Casey is just some sort of murderer. Although I suppose if the dad was like, well, I love my daughter, but I actually think she killed Kaylee, so...
That's how I read it, because the videos they show of her parents talking to her in the jail, he's always very disengaged. The mom's doing most of the talking. He's kind of leaning back, looking, Now, in the documentary, they make it seem, again, they like reframe everything. So you see right here, the way he's looking at me, I know what he knows, and I know that I'm threatened right now by him. But, if you don't have that set up and you just look at it a little bit more impartially, he's just, in my read of it is he's like, ugh, I know what again, this is my read of it. In his mind, he's going like, I don't believe a word she's saying, but she is my daughter, and here I am.
Yeah.
Whereas the mom, I feel, is a little more in denial. Speaking of, she's like, oh, maybe there's still some hope here.
Yeah. When they were going over that narrative of the videotaped while she's incarcerated meetings between the parents and Casey was also claiming, look how scared I am of my dad. And I'm like, I don't see it. Look how I'm trying to give him, visual daggers of like, hey, where where Kaylee is, you need, and that was her claim. And I'm like, well, maybe, but it's
they
not
also
obvious.
They didn't play the audio of her first phone call from the jail. When she got, how you get a phone call, right?
Yeah.
It was unbelievable. So she calls her house. Her mom answers. And the first words out of Casey's mouth to her mom are, saw your little interview on TV or whatever.
They did show that in the documentary.
Oh, they did? Okay. And then the mom's like, what do you mean? It's like, well, you were saying you don't know what my involvement is. And then she's like, look, I need the number for my boyfriend. I forget, I'm paraphrasing. And then put my brother on, and they put the brother on. And then he's like, what are you doing? He's like, I need the number for my boyfriend. It's like, why? Because he's my boyfriend? And so then the brother loses his patience and gets off the phone, and then they put her friend on it. And it's like, oh, I guess everyone's there. Look, put my brother back on. I need his number. I need and she's just like ordering everyone around, right? Her daughter is missing, probably dead. So like, this is the parts that don't add up. But again, she'll say, well, yeah, I'm delusional. I'm this. My dad's controlling me. All these things. But in that moment, it sounds like another type of person that you could imagine you can encounter, which is like, I don't care about anyone except myself right now. And she's just bossing everyone out, yelling at everyone. No one. And her brother says, look, it's really hard for anyone to want to help you right now. He says that. And that's like very interesting. That's her first call out from the jail.
Yeah. And so the question is that evidence that she killed her daughter? And I would say no. You can have an awful human being. And that's why this story was so compelling, was because if someone had a videotape of her stabbing her own kid or suffocating the kid, I don't know if this would have had a lot of media, because it doesn't have any kind of ambiguity to it. There's no question marks there,
right?
And with there are examples, and you can imagine, of course, of a very loathful human being, someone that you would hate to be around, someone that exploits other people, someone who's mean, someone who is abusive, and yet did not kill the child, because particularly because you don't have any evidence of how the child died. But I'm not saying she did it. I want to be clear that I'll get to my take later, and my take and might be shifting as Berto kind of speaks up here, but it's all this circumstantial evidence.
And it's unreliable narrators.
Yeah. Everyone's unreliable. The main narrators are the dad and Casey, and they're both known liars. And and Casey even admits herself that she's a known liar. Okay, so fast forward to the body hasn't been found, but the body's found 6 months later. So I just want to give you a little story that I heard. I don't know if you saw this in one of the documentaries. So a meter reader, someone, an official who reads meters, sees something off the road and looks suspicious. Doesn't look good to him. And so he calls the police and says, and this is during the search for Kaylee.
Oh, wow. I didn't know this. This is all the way back in the summer?
Yeah. So
my God.
So this is like in
August or something.
Yeah, August. So he's early August, actually. So it's like soon after the story comes out.
They would have had so much DNA, so much evidence, so much.
Yeah.
Oh.
So he calls the police and says, there's something by the Anthony house, a bag or something, and it looks suspicious. And so I would go check it out. No response. He calls the police again, says the same thing. No response. He calls the police again.
Oh my God.
No response. He calls the police again. No response. He kept calling into weeks later because he's like, it didn't look good. He finally is taken seriously. A police officer finally, this is after calling several times, and most people would call once and let it go. It's like, well, I don't know, they must be working on other things, but he's like, no. And a police officer finally gets around, and this is like, I don't know, maybe a month later. The police officer looks around, doesn't see anything.
Yeah.
And so that is a done deal then. Then he keeps calling. So fast forward, so August.
Oh my God.
September, October, November, December.
Oh my gosh. I did not know this.
He's calling the police. They finally go, okay, fine. Let's search again. And then they find the body.
That is such a miscarriage of justice because obviously one of the biggest problems is that by the time they found the body, it's the Florida heat. There's nothing left. There's bones.
Yeah.
And so they couldn't determine cause of death, time of death, any DNA. Like they couldn't do anything.
Yeah.
Other than there were a couple of things.
Right. There were a lot of things at the scene of the of the
there
dead
were in fact
body
like 5 different
that
clues
connected
here.
it to the house.
Yeah.
So it was circumstantial, but a lot of evidence pointing towards whoever bagged her up and threw her in the woods. At least initially bagged her up at the house of the Anthony house. Okay. Okay. So here's your. What car was O.J. Simpson in on the freeway?
The car chase, the
white,
white. What is it?
Cherokee?
No.
It's like a Chevy
Suburban. No. Is it Suburban? No, it's a white.
Now I gotta look it up. White car, Bronco. That's right.
Bronco. How do we not remember the white Bronco?
Yeah. Do they make Broncos anymore? Because I feel like that. To me, back in the day.
Thing.
The only SUVs were Broncos and Suburbans. Those are the only SUVs I knew of. Anyway, so now the baby is dead body is found in December of 2008. The next month, 2009, George Anthony, the father, is reported missing. He sent messages to family members threatening suicide.
Right.
And they caught up to him in a hotel, and he was taken to a hospital for psychiatric evaluation and later released. So that's kind of the white Bronco moment, right?
Could be, yeah.
Right? I mean, the body's found, and he's like, shit, if he was involved. You know what I mean?
Maybe, yeah. I don't know.
So I'm just saying it's a tick in that column.
Yeah.
It's super circumstantial, but, a tick in that column. All right, then.
But because you could also say, like, yeah, your granddaughter's body was found in a horrific manner.
Yeah.
And you go into some deep depression. It's like.
Totally.
And you're like, and I gave birth to my daughter, and she's the one. And let's say he was responsible for abusing her. Like, there's so many ways that could go down that don't mean he killed her.
Right.
It's hard.
Totally. Yeah. So a few years later, there's the trial, 6 weeks. Time magazine described it as the case, the social media trial of the century. And it was this introduction of all that stuff. And it just seems so quaint in today's world that everyone was like, the big story was they used MySpace to convict her, and there were other cases during this time too. Someone would claim that, like they couldn't go to work because they were sick or something. And then this picture comes out with a timestamp and da-da-da.
And that had never happened in history. Like really, there was nothing like that.
Yeah. And it was a lot of young people, and it played into the ongoing narrative that young people are stupid and irresponsible. And, it's a lot of wringing of hands and clutching of pearls. So the prosecution sought the death penalty, and they alleged that Casey wished to free herself from parental responsibilities and thus murdered Kaylee by administering chloroform and applying duct tape to her nose and mouth. The defense team, they contended that the child had obviously died but drowned accidentally in the family swimming pool, and that George Anthony had in fact disposed of the body. And Casey lied about this and other issues because of dysfunctional upbringing, which they said included sexual abuse by her father. And so there's a broader context to this case and also this documentary. At the time, the defense about sympathy of trauma, or the notion that trauma could cause one to act like this, the way that Casey did, the lying and all that kind of stuff, it was a lot less well known, right? You didn't have a bunch of people like myself who will advocate for this notion, like, hey, wait a second, trauma is a real thing. And I wish we had a different kind of nuance to it too, because the word trauma is so broad. Like mistreatment,
deep trauma or something.
Well, or treated in a way that is the perfect breeding ground for pathological lying. And shame lying and denial lying and all those kinds of things. So back then, you weren't going to get much sympathy from the public in particular, and maybe from the jury, who knows? But the public wasn't going to swallow that pill.
Right. Now, the thing that the prosecution, the reason they were so effective is because they didn't actually, because I listened to all their arguments and things, they didn't actually rest their whole case on feel sorry for her because she was actually abused. They only used that to feed one plausible or at least possible explanation to the jury about why someone might do the things that no mother would ever do. But they really rested their case on, and as we've seen, the prosecution cannot prove beyond a reasonable doubt. So like in his closing arguments, like, listen, if there's a doubt, we're done. There's no question. You can't convict. Like, that's it. And there is doubt, clearly. And then asterisk, and as we already told you, there's some possible explanations for her odd behavior, but that's not even the point. They didn't, and that was how it worked. So you didn't even need the jury to be fully like, oh, I could see how someone who has been tragically abused would then that was only like that could be, and there's not enough here, and there's these other questions, so I guess there is doubt.
Yeah.
Ooh, maybe I can't say that she's guilty.
Right, because the prosecution really hung their story, their allegation, their main narrative on the circumstantial evidence of the duct tape and the internet searches and her car smelling like a dead body. But of course, the defense can call upon other data. They could get their own investigators to take a look at things and throw doubt in it. And this just leads me to another thing that I hate about our society and the legal system. Every lawyer for both, the prosecution today, when they're interviewed in this documentary, 100% Casey did it. You asked the defense team, 100% she didn't do it. And they both had access to all the same information. You get expert witnesses, someone that understands duct tape or someone that understands cadaver dogs. 100% of the experts in the prosecution interpret it in a way that makes Casey look like she did it. 100% of the experts for the defense say, no, the prosecution is wrong. And, this was highlighted during the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial. It was the same thing. You had psychologists in my field and psychiatrists who were 100% just full court press on one side or the other. looking at the exact same data. And I'm like, this is not, it's one thing to have advocates. It's one thing to have attorneys who will spin things a certain way. Of course, that should be true. The prosecution and the defense attorneys, sure. But the experts, because it was also not only just the psychology experts, but there were medical experts looking at Johnny Depp's hand of the injury with the bottle. And of course, the Amber Heard expert was like, this is obviously not from a blow from a bottle. It's clearly when he, and then of course
so then you should just throw out those experts, right? Be like, okay, well, it's clearly we can't trust experts. So
right, but then as a jury, where are you supposed to be? And so
right.
To me, it's like, it sounds ridiculous when you understand how the legal system works, but we should have independent evaluators.
Yeah.
Who aren't being paid by either side.
Yep.
You could just have a pool of experts, and maybe you get 3 instead of just 1 to make sure that you get an average
get consensus. Yeah.
Consensus. Maybe you get 10 if you have the money. You get 10 independent people. But of course, in order to do that, the one side or the other has to pay for it. And they don't want to pay for something that isn't going to support their team. They don't want to take Johnny Depp's money and pay for 10 experts that are going to testify against him. If they're going to pay money, then they want to pay for something that's going to help. That's the capitalistic way. And so in this case with Casey, we'll never know because everyone who looked into the data was being paid one side or the other. You and I, Berto, will never know what an independent review would have found.
Right. Now, there was an independent review about the calls, and unfortunately, they didn't introduce, the prosecution bafflingly did, not the calls, the searches. The prosecution and the cell phone records is what it was. They didn't introduce this evidence, and even the defense later in an interview, years later, was like, they didn't understand why the prosecution didn't include the information because they were really prepared and scared that they were going to. Because the data was that the searches for chloroform and I forget, is something like surefire asphyxiation or something very close to that, were done at specific times where both the mom and the dad's phone records and work records showed they weren't home. And that right there is a smoking gun. And they couldn't get that in. Instead, the defense had the mom claiming that, oh, well, I searched for chlorophyll. So, it's so bad. To me, in the end, it's like, yes, there is no film of the thing. But when you put all the evidence together, I definitely am like, of course, in my mind, my story is, I have no idea if she was abused. It's quite possible she was abused. And something must have caused her to be the way she is. But I do think she was directly responsible for the death. Okay,
interesting. I didn't know that detail. But we'll get into, I'll ask you what you think happened in a second here. So, a lot of dramatic moments in the trial, too many to mention. You mentioned the Cindy, the mom coming forward and saying, it was me who was searching for chloroform. Even though
chlorophyll, and she made a mistake.
Even though you're saying that
she was at work, the records show she was at work at the time.
Yeah, because it wasn't just chloroform, like you said. It was also like how to suffocate someone or something. Yeah. So those 2 data points doesn't show that the mom, if it was her, just randomly was searching for chlorophyll. And then, and I was actually searching for a flower that's called Suffociligus, and I accidentally, what are you talking about?
So she claimed that there was something about a wrestler or a diver or someone who had asphyxiated. I mean, the mom, going through the whole lying thing, she just flat out lied.
Yeah.
She just lied.
I mean, it looks
and
like
I know she was protecting her daughter, but it's like,
Yeah. So all the pictures and the texts and her letters while she was in jail were included in the trial and also released to the public often, which is pretty awful when you think about it. Then there was kind of a bombshell moment where a woman named Crystal Holloway came forward and testified in the trial saying that she was having an affair with the dad recently, and that she testified under oath that the dad told her what really happened, and what she said the dad said is that it was an accident that spiraled out of control. So what do you think about that data point, Berto?
Yeah. So That's the other thing. The prosecution presented what actually sounds like it could have been, right? Like, hey, listen, there was an accident. The daughter did die. It was tragic. She drowned. Okay. Now, of course, that doesn't match. Like, why would someone duct tape someone's head after a drown? Like, that doesn't make any sense, right? But, fine, whatever. They drowned. And then the father, who's already a bad person, as we know, because I just talked about this other thing about the abuse, but the father was just a good enough father to Casey, but didn't care enough about the truth, so he went out of his way to, like, hide the body and all these things. Okay. That was the story presented. But if it were real, then you would think Casey would have just kept going with that the rest of her life, right? Like, that's what happened. But then her story now is completely different. It's not only completely different that, no, there was no drowning. In her mind, the daughter was alive for a lot of those 30 days, and it's just that her dad had her and was abusing her.
Yeah, so that's her story today. I don't know. She seemingly kind of vacillated a little bit, but yeah, her main story that she says is that he kidnapped her and had her somewhere else, and then he thinks that eventually he killed her either by accident or because what she claims is that when the father was raping Casey, and she would fight back, the father would actually put a pillow over her face, and so she thinks that Kaylee was accidentally murdered while she was being harmed in that way.
And then you have to accept that, like, those searches were totally random and unconnected because they happened the day that she went missing, not the day that supposedly the dad killed her later after imprisoning her, and that after killing her on accident with a pillow, he then is like, well, I probably should duct tape her face anyway. Like there's so many inconsistencies with that. It doesn't make any sense. What I cannot figure, other than the compulsive thing you're talking about, is why would you make this documentary now and come up with a new story when you were exonerated?
Well, because she can't walk around in public, is my impression. She can't even go to the store, is my impression, without being heckled and worried that someone's going to kill her, because people out there are rabidly wanting to harm that woman.
But someone advised her poorly because they made her believe that this documentary would make her look better.
I think it does. I mean,
I don't think so.
It couldn't hurt, Like I think it. So that's the other commentary, psychologically, sociologically, that I want to point out, is that not everyone is going to know all the things that you know or remember all the things that you remember. Especially
that's my point. She still lives in Florida. She lives in Florida.
But the tagline, so I asked my wife, I was like, what do you remember about Casey Anthony? And she's just like, oh yeah, I mean, she killed her daughter and she was partying. She was that woman, right? And she has kind of a memorable face, and she looks similar to the way she did 12 years ago. And I would imagine that for her, she would like to just live a regular life, but it's probably hard to do that. Now, it's also possible that, like OJ, she wants to a murderer, in all likelihood, a murderer who is trying to get people to not believe that she did it. Yeah, she was exonerated and all that, but here's the sociological element, is that right now is the perfect time to release a documentary like this that is well crafted by someone that understands trauma and pathological lying, how that can develop. I mean, the documentary lays out a very convincing argument, and it took a lot from me to be skeptical. I was like, I don't know about that.
But it's the pathology that has to go further.
So here's my thinking: is that people today, the pendulum has swung. The trauma sympathies, at least with a certain group of people, for good reasons, has swung so far in one direction that this really plays into a narrative of an innocent girl who was harmed by a very horrible man, and that caused her to do X, Y, and Z. And they gloss over the details that you're actually bringing up here that weren't in the documentary, that I might have known about, but I don't remember hearing about. And there's a good chance that at the very least there will be another mob of people that will actually be fighting for her after this documentary. I think that could happen.
So here's why
for better or for worse. I don't know if it's for better. I don't know if it's for worse.
I tend to disagree from the following perspective. Now, I don't disagree with you that the climate is different and a story of abuse plays very differently today, of course. But here's the thing. You could have made this documentary, but stuck to the prosecution story and just filled in all that additional information to really bring this sense of empathy of like, because, you know, the biggest questions were, how could you be partying? How could you be doing this? Right. Okay. Right. So sure, bring it in, be like, really talk about the abuse and talk about like, you know, how you were, you know, but the thing is like, and I think this is where the pathological part comes in. It's like, well, that's not good enough. I need those 30 days to something even more horrible was happening. That's why I was out in the, like think about the logic. No, you don't understand. The reason I was out seen and photographed like that and getting a tattoo about Bella Vita isn't just because I had been abused as a child and because I grew up in a house of lies and because I was traumatized that this horrible thing happened on accident and then my horrible dad told me he was covering up and warned me not to talk. And it's not that. It's actually even worse. The reason I was out and about smiling in photographs, getting a tattoo about Bella Vita, is because that horrible dad had my daughter in prison and was abusing her. Come on.
Right. I mean, so I guess when I think about, because as soon as she established herself as a pathological liar, everything from that, which is early in the documentary, everything from that point forward, I was like, well, I'm going to, and this is what maybe this is what I do with clients. I have this well-worn track in my brain where I'm like, okay, I can't take anything they say at face value. I have to start piecing together. And I guess I do this with everyone because when a client comes in telling me about the conflict they had with their partner last night, their narrative is, you know, always countered by someone else. You know, I've been with enough couples to hear completely different narratives. And I'm like, well, you know, emotions play into how you remember things, and there's denial and there's wishful thinking, all that kind of stuff. So the things that I heard when she was telling her narrative, she was giving all the details, I was like, well, in all likelihood, so I'll get to what I think is likely, but basically what I'll say at this point is that when she was talking about the imprisonment and the ongoing, and when I was incarcerated, I was like looking at my dad and like a lot of things I was like, I'm not going to go that far, but I will add to the possibility of this other narrative that isn't what you're saying, but it's short of that, but it's not what the narrative was of the prosecution, potentially. That's what I was doing. Yeah. So she was acquitted of murder and of any kind of abuse of the child, but she was found guilty of lying to the cops, essentially. And they said that she didn't have to serve any more time, basically, because she had already been incarcerated waiting trial. So she basically went free after the trial. A lot of outrage, again, because going back to that statistic, like 80% of Americans thought that she killed her daughter. And there were death threats for the jurors. There were death threats for Casey as well. Casey actually ends up living with her attorney and then works for her attorney and still works for her defense team, trying to help people who are wrongfully convicted. Okay, so let's go through what we think happened. So Here are the different stories, Berto, and I want you to give me a percentage chance of each of these stories. Okay, what percentage likelihood? And there are 10 stories.
Oh wow!
Story number 1: Casey did it. She was the only one that knew about it. The father and the mother never saw the body. They weren't trying to cover it up. So Casey did it. She put the body in the trunk, and she later disposed the body in the woods. And we don't know exactly why she did it, but it's possible she did it because she wanted to have her single life back. Maybe she did it because she just, but she volitionally murdered. It wasn't an accident. So what's the percentage chance that you think that is the story?
99.
99?
99.
Not an accident.
Not an accident.
And for you, the data point is the Firefox browser history.
There's the specific searches for chloroform and surefire asphyxiation. Again, I'm paraphrasing. That's definitely one. The second one is the duct tape on the face, coupled with the blankie and the heart sticker on the duct tape. The third is the chloroform found on the body.
What about the heart sticker? I don't what's
There's
that
like
about?
a little heart sticker on the duct tape on the mouth or something. I don't
know.
But anyways, that part's just like, I feel like she was doing a weird combination of like Like, because the way she talked about the Bella Vita tattoo, it's like in her mind she made up this story of like, this is for the best, and like, but I'm sending her off with her little blankie, and like, this is just how I see it playing out, right? Coupled with her 31 days of non-action at all in this regard, coupled with her car being disappeared and then gets towed and it smells like death, coupled with her lying in tremendous ways about what actually happened repeatedly for years, even now in the latest documentary, and coupled with the fact that her dad had found the car and that's what triggered the police being called in the first place, and coupled with the accounts from her friends and her ex-boyfriend about how she was behaving and what all these things. When I put it all together, now, this doesn't mean she wasn't abused. This doesn't mean some terrible things didn't create what she is. I'm just saying, I believe she, on purpose, killed her child in horrifically, unfortunately.
With chloroform, do you think?
I don't know. She definitely... I don't know.
Asphyxiated somehow.
Yeah, maybe there was chloroform found on the bodies, but I don't know. That's where it does get a little murky. Did she give her too much? But I just, based on the searches, I don't think it was an accident. Right. The only way it could have been is that was the only other possibility for me, was that she was sedating her so much, including with chloroform, that she became unresponsive, and then she panicked and she's like, okay, how do I just kill her off then? And then she duct tapes her, and then but I don't know. That seems like Occam's razor tells me no, she just actually got tired of it. And so I'm 99% on the first one.
I'm glad that you are an expert on this, because I certainly am not. And hearing you fill in a lot of the details that were dubiously left out of this documentary, which I don't know if we can call it a documentary, really, because I think of documentary as being of the facts.
Impartial.
Yeah. I am a lot more swayed in that direction, and it really points to just how manipulative this documentary was. So when you were watching, but I still don't. So for me, percentage-wise, yeah, maybe I'd give it a 60% chance that that's true or something. But when you're watching this documentary, were you just like vomiting the entire time?
No, and I when it started, like, first of all, I didn't have the context for, I didn't realize there was, when you told me, hey, I didn't realize that this had come out. So when it started, I was like, all right, let's go. Now, there were a couple weird things at the beginning, like her and the production crew rented a house where they're going to interview her. I'm like, oh, okay, wait. So it's like a full-time thing with her. Okay. That was a little different. Like, normal documentaries, you get her interviews, but you also get a lot of people. So anyways, but I thought, okay, fine. As they started presenting the information, there was a lot of things that I was learning that either I totally forgot or was new to me. And so I was actually kind of coming along for the ride. But like I mentioned earlier, and maybe it was my bias, but there were certain things about how she was describing events where I was like, you're making up stuff here. Like, this doesn't feel right. Number one. Number two, as the documentary progressed, that's when I started feeling more manipulated. And it did remind me of some of those other documentaries we've watched where it's like, wait a minute, you're just showing me like a weird version of things.
So if that's true, if this is true, not only that a lot of the data that you're pointing out is pretty indicative, because a lot of the jurors actually, upon being interviewed in more contemporary times, a lot of them will say things along the lines of, if I could go back in time, I would have convicted her. Not maybe that strong of language, but
sure,
but in that direction. Maybe because of the Firefox browser data that came out, or things that weren't included in the document in the trial. I don't know, but
yeah,
if it's true that the documentary left that out, and if it's true that it's surely the documentary people knew everything that you know and much more, right?
Yeah.
So if all that's true, then are the documentarians evil? Because that is a problem.
I mean, but so it's kind of hard, because if you saw the defense team, they weren't just in her corner fully back then, like all the hugs, all the things. She lives and works with them, and they stand 100% behind her. And I feel like there is there are a segment of folks that really believe in her. And I think that the documentarians, unfortunately, for the sense of impartiality, I think they got swayed. And I feel this documentary had a slant. It had an opinion.
And that's what I'm saying sociologically. That's what I'm saying is in today's environment, in today's climate, it is not just Casey that this documentary is about.
Right. Yes, that's fair. I can see that, yeah.
But to me, after hearing all the data you're throwing out there, and you're a smart guy, so I'm going to be swayed by you, that you got to pick someone better to hold up as your poster child for misogyny and abuse. I mean, she might have been abused, fine, but a lot of people are going to watch this and be like, but she's a horrible person that killed her daughter and she's lying, and I'm going to throw out the whole thing.
And so that's part of the thing that I feel is a missed opportunity, because look, as we said at the beginning, this thing is horrible no matter which way you slice it. And even in my version of events, I still leave the door fully open. In fact, I more than leave it open. I would say, if you were asking me percentage chance that she was abused, I'd say at least 60%, maybe even higher. So I would say, look, it is quite possible that this is a horrible abuse victim as well. And that should be discussed. But the part where I start, my shores are not tied to their shores is when there's so many scenes where the music and the cuts and the editing is done so manipulative.
I wouldn't say so many scenes. I would say it's a constant hum that is. In fact, the soundtrack was starting to annoy me because it was so melodramatic, and I'm like, I get it. You're really trying to emotionalize the situation, but I don't know if we're supposed to be doing that right now in a documentary, But I'll say, even though I'm pretty skeptical, it pushed me in the direction where I was like, fairly, if I was going to put my money down on something, I was going to say it was an accident. But after hearing what you're presenting, which is the more of the factual information, and some of the facts I did get from the documentary and by looking up other information, but it was spun in such a way that it didn't seem like it was as relevant as when you lay it out. You know what I mean? So anyway, other stories, story number 2, and I've sort of compiled this based on all the different possibilities and what people have theorized. So in story number 2, Casey's story is mostly true. Kaylee died, but Kaylee died by... So Casey's story is mostly true. Kaylee did die, but it was by accident. The dad found her. The dad took the body. Casey went into denial about it, or just kind of freaked out, didn't know what to do. The dad was worried about an investigation or something, so he went into denial about it too, because he has shame issues from his family of origin. And so dad and Casey both tried to sweep it under the rug. Cindy, the mom, doesn't have that issue, and she was like frantically like, where's Kaylee? Where's Kaylee? Where's Kaylee? And so obviously you don't think that's a likelihood because you're 99% story 1.
Right. Because so the things that work against it, look, as a narrative, in fact, I think that's why the prosecution's version of events was enough of a doubt for the jury, because it's like, well, okay, maybe, I guess that could have happened. But now when you add all the information, it's like, well, wait. So first of all, Casey is not saying that that's what happened. She's saying that the dad brought the body and she thought maybe she was dead, but then in reality she wasn't dead, and the dad
so
imprisoned for 30 days.
But that's when I am reading through what she's saying, right?
Sure.
That it's possible.
Okay, and you're right. Right now you're just talking about this one possibility, which is that
I'm not saying it's mostly true. And this was a story. So let me just kind of lay out in more detail what I thought happened, because this was, and it's weird because even before it got melodramatic and started pulling all its manipulative tactics in the documentary, pretty quickly I was like, well, most kids when they die in situations like this, it's by accident. Kids, bad things happen. They fall down the stairs or something, or even you abuse a kid too hard, like using chloroform or Xanax or whatever, and then they die. That kind of stuff happens. Murdering a child is quite particular, right?
So let's walk through it though, because so the dad finds the dead, drowned body of the child in the pool.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the first thing that happens. And then he accuses her, and she kind of like, oh, God.
Well, no. What I imagined, so again, and there's so many variables and so many possibilities, but when I was watching about, I don't know, just a quarter of the way through the documentary, this was the narrative that just sort of jumped out at me, and I was just like, how come no one's asking this question? And then the rest of the documentary kind of confirmed some of it, and that's why when Kaylee started talking about the imprisonment during the 30 days, I was like, she's probably just thinking that that's possibly true, or she is lying. But anyway, so the story that I started to emerge, and I'm much less adhering to this since you're providing all this other data, is that, yes, Kaylee got up and did get into the pool. There was a ladder. And she drowned and she died.
She drowned.
And no one killed her, because there's not a lot of reason to believe that, because it is such an aberrant behavior for a parent or a grandparent to kill a 2.5-month-old, or a 2.5-year-old child. It happens, of course, and it could have happened here, and I'm more convinced. But it's less likely. And so the child dies in the pool.
Places with pools, it's not uncommon. Little kids drown in the pools.
It's the number one way children die in Florida is in swimming pools.
Jesus. Okay.
Number one reason why children die, not just by accident, by swimming pools. And by the way, if you have a swimming pool out there, put a gate around it or drain it or something, because this happens all the time. To dogs, to even drunk uncles can fall into it. Anyway. And, let's save our drunk uncles. We need them.
Yes,
we need them posting those things on Facebook that annoy us every day. What would we do without it? Anyway, so then... so the father is freaking out, right? And we can imagine the father might initially blame Casey, but it's kind of incidental.
Okay, so but in either case, they're both there. Mom's not there. Grandma's not there.
Right.
They're both there. They have a dead child that drowned.
And then this is total speculation, and there's a lot of variables. But then what I could see happening is the father is like, okay, we have to deal with this, and I'm a former police officer. I know what to do. And if we call the cop, and he, because of his family of origin and his way, he doesn't think we should just call the cops. He doesn't think about telling the truth. Neither does Casey, because one, it's just their pattern, and two, because the dad's a pathological liar too, potentially, and two, the dad, if he did abuse Casey, he could worry, crap, if people start looking into this family, they're going to find all sorts of crap. So in a panic,
so in a panic, the best way for people not to look into this family is to take what was a normal, most common accident in Florida for little kids, and now do what?
Dispose of the body, I guess. I mean, when you put it that way, it doesn't sound very
How
credible.
are we going to dispose of the body? Because I'm a former cop. I've been around the block more than a few times. So first step, as I know, when a body drowns, you're trying to get rid of it. The first thing is you put duct tape around the head. You got to do that. That's a must-have. That's the first thing you do. Also, spray a little chloroform. You want to leave some chemical trails there, throw people off.
Well, I don't know if it's accurate, but in the documentary, they did throw doubt in
fine. Don't do
the chloroform
just the duct tape.
But even the duct tape, they said that there was duct tape up by the head that could have been used on the sack that was, covering her.
And the mouth. It was...
Well, but they threw doubt on that. I don't know how accurate that was, but they were throwing doubt on the
All right, so maybe the story is we're going to hide the body really well down the street in a easily found place. But to hide it well, because I'm a cop, I know how these things work. We're going to add a couple little weird things to throw people off when they finally find the body, which is probably not going to be a long time from now, because I'm just going to drop it down the street because I'm a former cop. And now, what we're going to do is you're going to go away for 30 days. And when grandma asks, we're going to just play dumb. And in 30 days, I'm going to find your car and I'm going to pretend that it smells like death, because that's going to help our case a lot.
Well, so when you put it that way, but I don't know, people do stupid shit, and so
but former cop, we can't have both ways. We can't say, he's a former cop, and no, if he's a former cop, then shouldn't he know better?
Well, no, I don't think he knows. So in there's a scenario where he thinks he knows better, but he actually doesn't know better. And he disposes of the child in the same way that he disposed of their pets. The brother, Lee, said that but of course, Casey could have learned it from that as well, right? But yeah, I mean, when you describe it that way, it's just like, it's a much easier Occam's razor to believe that Casey...
That a 19-year-old, or sorry, a 20-year-old...
22-year-old. It's much easier to imagine, given the clear, concrete data that she is very bad at making choices, that she would put the body in the trunk, leave it there for a while, and then after a while, just kind of throw it in the woods where a meter... I mean, there's got to be other places like... I mean, I've never had to kill someone. I've never had to think about such a thing, but I've seen enough movies to know that if you want to dispose of a body, particularly in Florida, all you have to do is put a couple of rocks. Yeah, and you throw it in one of them. There are marshlands. I mean, if you've ever been to Florida, everywhere you go, there's these little tracts of waterways with gators in it, and you put it in a bag, you put rocks in it, it sinks, and it gets eaten and it goes away. Or at the very least, you put rocks in it and you throw it in the water, or at the very least, you throw it deeper in the woods, or at the very least, you bury it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whoever left it there, they left it within eyesight of just a regular worker. So that's, it's pretty odd. So yeah, to believe that the father would be that careless, I mean, maybe. But yeah, Occam's razor, it's much more in line with what profile she had.
Think about the story she tells about the car, because you're saying that there's disagreement about it, but what does she say? She doesn't say there was never a smell in the car. She says, well, no, but so I bought some groceries and some meat, and I forgot, I left it in there, and then sure, it smelled horrible.
But to me, that's her throwing in her pathological lying element where she doesn't need to. When I was originally watching it, now when I'm rewriting history by what you're saying. Anyway.
And why did the car even get towed? Like, what are we doing here? So I mean, So when I add it all up together, that possibility that it was that she drowned on accident and the dad covered it up, I don't believe it.
Yeah.
0%.
Well, maybe. Yeah.
1%.
Well, another option is that Kaylee died by accident, and the dad had no idea about it, and it was either by chloroform or by Xanax or by the pool, that Casey could have looked the other way for a bit of time. I mean, it doesn't take long. I can't remember the stats, but I think a child can drown in under a minute.
I mean, you have to breathe, and you can't swim. What are you going to do?
Yeah. If Casey was like going number 2 or something, and Casey runs outside and you can't keep your eye on the kid all the time. Maybe the kid even figured out how to use the ladder. I don't know. But given everything that you're saying, either she accidentally died and Casey was generally a loving mom, never intending on killing Kaylee, and was never, Xanaxing or chloroforming her, or she just flat out either put her life at risk and quote unquote accidentally killed her, or literally just killed her.
Right.
Yeah, interesting. Anyway, other stories that people have put forward is that the dad killed Kaylee, which is her story.
Right. So look, again, was Casey abused? We don't know. This dude could be a monster. We don't know, right? It's so impossible to tell. So that's the part that I can't know. I cannot know what really happened in that family.
Then why did that witness, the cheating person with the father, why did she testify that the father told her that Kaylee died by accident?
Right. That's a great question. Yeah, that's a really great question. And along with that, I would say, because that was a witness for the defense. Yeah. But along with that, I would say, like, look, if the prosecution's argument is that she died accidentally, and the dad told the lover that she died accidentally, and the accidental death definitely is not a murder conviction for either of them, why then the dad, fine, maybe the dad's even worse. Why would he double down on the other side to say, like, even now, say, look, I love my daughter, but I think she had something to do with her. Like, why? Like, again, the problem here is if they're both compulsive liars. It's just that in the scale of compulsive lying, and again, he could be an absolute monster behind the scenes, but there's more evidence for public constant lies on her end, and so it makes it hard. So I can't speak to that witness. You're right, that is a very odd thing that she says that. But I have to go back to like, if she really died by accident, then the only way I can make the rest of it make sense is that both of them, the dad and Casey, are so self-destructive and cannot think through logic at all. And that all his years as a cop didn't help him at all. So if that's true, then yeah, I guess maybe that's what happened. And then, they're both just terrible at helping themselves. Terrible.
Yeah. I mean, clearly she is. And we don't know about him, but he could also be. Okay, let's take a break. When we get back, let's continue talking. What do you say?
Yep, let's do it.
All right, we're back from the break. So other stories are someone else killed Kaylee, but that doesn't seem likely. Another story is that Xanax killed Kaylee because the Zanny the nanny thing, or she would use chloroform to. But there, it's pretty circumstantial evidence. There's not a lot of evidence that Casey would drug Kaylee in order to get her to shut up. That's a shot in the dark. It could be, but there's really almost no evidence in that column.
By the way, that could also be the answer for why, if it were true that he told his lover that it was an accident, there's several other explanations. One of them could simply be like, we know that he does lie in many cases, right? So he doesn't want to say, yeah, I think my daughter killed her, right? So he could just simply say, it was an accident. Right. Or he could suspect that it was an accident because of the Zanny thing or the chloroform, or all of the above. So there's other possible explanations, even if we believed that what she's saying is true. And because, there's also the denials from both sides. So.
Yeah, it's true. I hadn't thought about that. Or I did before you said it. Yeah. And then I thought, well, let's move forward in this podcast because it's almost 2.5 hours. But yeah, that's absolutely plausible given the timeline, especially. Another story is that Casey she used too much chloroform. Another is that convicted kidnapper Vasco Thompson killed Kaylee because there's cell records showing that George, the father, was in contact with this convicted kidnapper.
Oh, I did not know this angle.
but it's really stretching
it's a stretch.
it. Yeah.
You would think the defense would have gone after that one.
Yeah. Another story is that Kaylee's boyfriend Tony killed Kaylee. But
now I will say there is one fact that could point in the direction of two people involved, and that person might be the boyfriend. And it's that technically Casey had left the house when the search was done on the computer. But of course, what the prosecution and everyone else would say, or everyone that's on that side would say, yeah, no, she came back. That's not hard. Unlike the mom and the dad, there's no records of her location, so her coming back to the house is not that mysterious. But some folks have speculated that, well, the boyfriend could have been in on it. So
yeah.
Now, why the boyfriend was there in the house without her? That's where it gets a little stupid.
But there's no evidence pointing towards him, but he could be. There's also very little evidence that Casey did it for that matter.
Now, I will say this, though. This is one part that has eluded me. Now, I get that casual friends would ask, hey, where's Kaylee? And then she's like, oh, and I get that a lot. Look, when I was younger, I didn't quite understand the dynamics of kids. So I suppose if I had a friend with a child and I often didn't see them with the child, I don't know that would trigger alarm bells in my head because I was so clueless about what it takes to raise a child. But the boyfriend that she was living with, I don't get how he wasn't like, but wait, seriously, what's going on with Kaylee?
Well, it wouldn't be a stretch for a boyfriend to, if Casey had said, well, she's with my
the
parents.
Grandparents?
Yeah.
But then when the grandparents show up and say, where is she? And then she's like, oh, no, she's with the nanny. Then wouldn't the boyfriend go like, whoa, that's not what you told me?
Well, or she said that it was, the kids and the nanny. The cluelessness can absolutely extend into the boyfriend just being like, okay, well, the kids, I'm glad
but
because
you
I
gotta
get Casey.
At least think there's something not right there. At least he doesn't give a crap about that child.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. Well, that's probable.
Yeah.
Not because of a boyfriend, but just because of the age. And then the last story is that Casey is an Illuminati puppet, which I'm going to give.
That's 100%.
I'm going to give that 100% too. Yeah.
But is there really a story like that?
Mm-hmm.
What's the end result? Like, what's the situation there?
I don't care.
Oh, because of the whole. Oh, it's the whole like kids imprisonment. Okay.
I don't care to know. I don't care to talk about it.
You don't care. Okay.
Let's see. State laws were passed. Kaylee's law.
Yeah, Casey's law.
Kaylee's law that made it a felony if parents didn't report a missing child to the police within 24 hours. There's only a handful of states that I think might have passed it. I'm not sure. A nonprofit group that searched for Kaylee while there was a search for Kaylee, they sued Casey for sending them on a wild goose chase, and it was settled out of court possibly for about $75,000. Casey filed bankruptcy, saying that she owed up to maybe $1 million. I don't know how she racked up that much debt, but she had. This is after the trial.
Now, by the way, I mean, because like there were lawyers and because the lawyers, weren't they doing it? I don't remember. Yeah, I don't
know. Maybe it was lawyers' fees. I don't know. Okay. And maybe the lawyers are like, hey, if you do bankruptcy, then I don't know. Yeah. In the documentary, the dad was in a bad accident, interviewed on Dr. Oz, and he almost died. And he says, quote, Casey, I just want to say, Casey, I'm so sorry for what I've done. I need to be forgiven for what I've done. And of course, in the documentary, they clearly lay that out as an admission of guilt of sexually abusing and killing Kaylee. But in the light of what you're saying, it's like, well, he could just be sorry for having abused her and maybe for testifying against her and just not cultivating a better relationship with her or something. I don't know. There's a lot of things
it's hard to know. Like one question I came out of what this documentary with is like, so, I mean, next steps, there's no statute of limitations on murder. So wouldn't the next steps be like, if I'm Casey, I'm working with attorneys to build a case against my dad, but I guess it could be written off as like, no, she's had too much trauma, she wants to move on or something. But wouldn't you think like, well, we know, wait, there's a murderer still out there? Right. I don't know. So it's one of those things that I'm like, well, if that's the story, shouldn't we pursue that?
So, final word I will say is it's an interesting case, a lot of twists and turns, a lot of details. This documentary is highly manipulative, and I would contend, based on you convincing me of the other possible narrative, that this documentary is actually harming not only Kaylee's memory and implicating George, because the documentary heavily implicates the grandfather in the murder and all sorts of other things. Also giving a platform for a known pathological liar to just continue potentially to pathologically lie. Also to hold up as an example as a victim. I mean, the way that the documentary makes it out, it's like Casey is the victim of all victims, victimized throughout her life, multiple people. Then the father just is a tyrant and takes the child away from her and manipulates, and then the society comes after her, and the prosecution comes after her, the police come after her, and sure, she lied a little bit. And there was this one line where I was kind of rolling my eyes. She's like, yeah, I mean, some people say I'm a liar, but I'm blunt. I just tell it like it is. I mean,
they asked her, what's your relationship to the truth now? She said, well, if anything, I'm too honest.
Yeah, I'm like,
too honest.
Oh, please. Oh, please. So it's, it's got some issues there.
Yeah, I agree with you. It is unfortunate because the way I feel is the crazy thing is I still feel empathy for even for Casey, even though I believe she killed her, because my thing is this: even if she wasn't abused, even if all that were true or not true, this woman, through genetics, statistical random, who knows, was robbed of a normal relationship with her daughter. Even if she's the one who killed her, and even if she didn't even get abused, I'm like, not only do I feel like infinitely bad for that poor little girl, but I'm like, and you as a mother, you got robbed of a life with a little child that would have been your daughter and would have loved you. And the whole thing is so tragic. And then let alone if there is a possibility she was tragically abused. At the very least, that house sounded like it was just a mess of lies. Like, I gotta tell you, it was quite depressing going through that documentary because there was no sunshine at the other side.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, let's end there. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because
you deserve it.